Welcome to Mulready Minutes with Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner Glenn Mulready. This is a podcast about insurance for insurance folks, risk managers, and business leaders. We'll dive deep and look at what is and isn't working, talk to leaders in the industry, and keep you informed on what's happening in Oklahoma and around the country.
Well, welcome to another Mulready Minutes podcast. I'm real excited about this episode. We've got a great guest with us, and so this is about disaster preparedness, about being ready. We have a new theme that we've launched at the Oklahoma Insurance Department. Mulready says, get ready. So before, during, and after a storm. And so sort of in conjunction with that, we have a great guest who is a good friend as well. And Paul Martin is from Austin, Texas. And let me just, if I can, I'll just read his bio. But Paul earned his degree in public policy studies from Vanderbilt and a law degree from the University of Miami. He is admitted to practice law in Tennessee, Florida, and Texas. Paul works in government relations for a reinsurance trade association. In addition to having successfully tried a number of jury and non-jury cases to verdict, he's also worked as house counsel for a Fortune 50 insurance company. During his professional career, he's helped develop incident response and business continuity planning and training programs for law firms and insurers. In September 2015, Paul published a book, Pivot Points, Creating a Culture of Preparedness and Resiliency in America. That's the book I've read. And Paul examines the current state of the preparedness movement and suggests various strategies to implement a preparedness mindset into the American culture. And I would highly recommend that book. In his first book, Bracing for Impact, A Practical Guide for Preparing for Disaster, came out in 2011. And Bracing for Impact provides law firms and small businesses with practical guidance on developing disaster plans to improve workplace safety and business continuity. As I said, Paul lives in Austin. He's very involved. He has a wife who's a CPA and a daughter who's a CPA. So welcome, Paul. Welcome to Oklahoma.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. Not that I'm not excited about other episodes we do, but I guess as I was thinking about this, preparing, I thought the nice thing about this episode is it literally applies to everybody. And so, we've had some great episodes, but I'll have to admit, when we're doing an episode on, captive insurance, there may be like 3% of the population that don't care about that.
It's a very exciting topic, captive insurance.
But this topic
Right.
and what we're going to talk about really literally applies to absolutely everyone. So let me jump right into some questions. So you have been I jokingly in my family refer to you as my prepper friend. And so great resource for me and, some of the things that we have implemented in our house and even in my day-to-day life. Has come from you and just a great resource. So tell me how you kind of got just started in that, or was there an incident that triggered your focus and being prepared? But tell me how you got started in that whole.
So I grew up on a farm in Tennessee, was very active in the 4-H projects of beef and wildlife and forestry and public speaking. And so when you think about being a farm kid, sometimes those life lessons of resiliency tend to bleed into other parts of your life as well. And being Gen X, we were raised on movies like Red Dawn and The Day After and all those, really scary World War III type movies. And that was just part of our steady diet. But I really didn't get into this until I show up to go to law school in Miami in August of 1992. And a week later, Hurricane Andrew came through. And so here I am, Tennessee farm kid who has never lived outside the state of Tennessee. I have been in Miami for an entire week, and now we have a Category 5 hurricane bearing down on us. And I had no power in my apartment for about 17 days, and I made a promise and a pledge to myself that I will never be as unprepared for a natural disaster or any other disaster as I was for that event. And so then a few years later, we had Y2K, which turned out to be a non-event, but I think the educational piece of that was that the infrastructure and the systems that we had built to run our society may not have been as resilient as we thought. And then, a couple of years later, we had 9/11. And I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. And so after that event, after 9/11, I really started getting serious about writing and blogging and talking to people about preparedness. And as a result, I've made a lot of great friends, and I've learned a lot of really valuable life lessons along the way.
That's great. So there indeed was an incident, a storm incident that triggered or moved you in that direction.
Yeah. And I think that's very common for a lot of people. In Texas we had the winter storm just last year, And there were a lot of people who said, you know what, I think I'm going to start becoming better prepared, or even a prepper, because you lived in your house for 3 or 4 days with no electricity, some of those days with no water. People had sort of dismissed, I think, being prepared until it came to them, it came to their house, came to their neighborhood, and then that's when they decided, I need to start taking this more seriously.
Yeah, I know personally, ice storm, I can't remember the year back when in Tulsa, and, being without power for quite a few days. Boys were younger. It was kind of fun for about 48 hours, cooking hot dogs on the fireplace and that sort of thing. But yeah, that sort of triggered me a little bit as well. And so, I mean, that led to our purchase of a generator, was just that ice storm where we went without for at least a week with no power. So one thing that I have loved, Paul, when I read the book, is your focus, I guess, if you will, on, and I'll read a quote, above all else, take action so that if and when crisis comes, your family's needs are covered, and that's my emphasis on, and you're in a position to help others. So I've enjoyed that perspective in your book and in your take on it, is you're not just positioning yourself for you and your family, that's the priority, but also that puts you in a position to help others. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the book was really sort of a self-evaluation, and prior to that, I'd always thought of preparedness as a individual sport. I'm prepared, you're not. When the disaster comes, I win, you lose.
Sucks to be you.
Sucks to be you, right. And as I started writing and thinking more back about my journey in preparedness, I realized, that's a really selfish mindset. And if we're all taking that attitude, then what is the benefit to society as a result? And as I began to think more about it, and as my faith developed and as my involvement in the community, involvement in charities developed, I realized, this is about being prepared, having my affairs squared away, so that I don't have to worry that my family's needs are being met, my pets' needs are being met, so that I can be a resource to my neighborhood, to my community, to my employer, so that we can be an asset in that necessary rebuilding process after a disaster. And when we start to think about it in terms of helping the community, the wonderful thing about talking about preparedness here in Oklahoma is it reminds me of the Oklahoma Standard, right? Those values of service, of kindness, of honor. It's really, I think it's an easier sell here than it may be in other states, because you have all these natural disasters that you have to contend with. You had that horrible attack here years ago in 1995. People in Oklahoma understand this, and it's just a matter of, experts tell us it's a matter of saliency and self-efficacy. That's the two things you need to get people better prepared. Saliency is making it important. Self-efficacy is about teaching them how to do that. The saliency piece in Oklahoma is already done. Now we just need to work, all of us need to work on self-efficacy, actually getting better prepared.
Mm-hmm. And so you talk about, and just on that point, just last week I was down in Kingston, Oklahoma, where tornado hit with our emergency management director, and we talked about that when we left. When there's like that, a big storm hits, places are trashed, people are injured. Luckily no one was killed here in Oklahoma in that, but so that's a really rough part, and it's amazing to see the damage that's done. But then what I got to see 2 days, 48 hours later, maybe not even 48 hours later, is the Oklahoma Standard. So there's folks down there cleaning up. There are people, volunteers out handing out food and water everywhere. I mean, it's really uplifting to see that in action. And you talk about that from the standpoint of those folks that are what you call ready citizens. So what is a ready citizen in your mindset?
Yeah, so a ready citizen is someone, again, sticking with the Oklahoma theme, that embraces that Oklahoma standard. But in addition to that, in order to effectuate those values, they've made the decision to have supplies on hand, extra food, extra water, as well as the training necessary to be helpful to others. They have some first aid training. They know how to run that chainsaw when the trees come down their neighborhood. They take care of their vehicles. They do lots of preventative maintenance so that when they want to help, they're actually capable of helping, because there's so many people who have a good heart and want to help, but they've not made any efforts, any plans of when a disaster strikes, what can I do? And all of us can do something. There are people who are older, who may not be as physically strong as they were many years ago, but there are things they can do. There are things little kids can do. And part of the thing that I stress to people is find something that you are really good at that is needed in a time of disaster, and get really good at delivering that good or service. And you will find that there are many opportunities for you to be a helper in your community in times of crisis.
Yeah, to your point about even age, last week I saw very young people, school age teenagers, handing out food and water. I saw, no offense, but some elderly folks, part of the Baptist Relief Network there. I mean, they immediately come down, and these guys are in their 70s, wielding chainsaws and clearing off lots for folks that they've never met in their life. And so there's that response that is really, really just heartwarming. And I would just say, I mentioned at the beginning, our Mulready Says Get Ready, and so a little story about being a ready citizen that I may have already shared with you, Paul, but I did a really good job over the years of training my sons on how to, if dad's gone, dad's in Oklahoma City or dad's traveling and we lose power, here's the steps, here's exactly what we do with the generator. Well, it was just a few weeks ago, I was getting ready to go out of town, and there was a pending storm coming to Oklahoma. And I realized, I walked out to the living room and told my wife, Sally, hey, Mulready says get ready, but I didn't help you get ready. You don't know how to operate that generator. Your boys do, and they're all now gone to college. So literally, I'm out there at 6 a.m. in the garage, walking her through the steps and showing her how to operate the generator if they lose the power while we're gone. So it's also a kind of evolving process of being prepared. So let's say someone comes to you, Paul, and they want to get started. They are hearing the message that's in your book and that we're talking about today, but how does someone get started?
Yeah, so the challenge has been, as of late, 20 years ago when I got into this, there was not a lot of really good information about how to get started in preparedness. Now we have the opposite problem. Now there's lots of information out there. You get information overload. Some of the information is better than other parts of the information. So what I have done is, because I was getting so many of those questions you talk about, is I just set up a website and I've created a 50-page manual you can download for free, and it goes through step by step, paint by number, on how to get prepared. You can do a fair amount of your preparedness in about 3 days. So you could take a long weekend and buy stuff, and the stuff I would suggest you get, most of it's available at your local grocery store. Most of it's available at your local sporting goods store. You don't have to buy NASA astronaut food or 80-year shelf life. I mean, I have some of that stuff, and there's some good products out there, but it's not necessary. So you can go through these steps. I have a blog, and I talk about various topics as well. And one of the reasons I started that was people would ask me questions. What about a generator? What do I need to know about a generator? What do I need to know about this? What do I need to know about water purification? Well, I have blog posts, and I just send them a link now. So there's a lot of ways you can do this very inexpensively. And that's one of the things I really stress is start simple, do the inexpensive things, do the free things first, right? There's so many things you can do for free. You can take an inventory of your items in your house for insurance purposes. Doesn't cost you a dime, right? You can look around and clean out your closets. That doesn't cost you a dime. Do those things that don't necessarily cost any money. Do that as part of maybe your pre-work, and then you can start building into preparedness, because you're going to need a place to put all that extra food, maybe some extra water. Getting some of that stuff out of your closets, that didn't cost you anything, that's a good first step.
Mm-hmm. That's great. As you talk, I think of it's like getting in shape, right? You're not gonna run out and run a marathon tomorrow, but you're going to start by taking some steps and running a mile or getting there. And I think as you were talking, I was kind of just thinking of that as getting in shape. Like you got to just start somewhere and just start taking steps forward.
That's a great analogy. And my friends who do marathons always refer to a kind of a training program. They've got a marathon, they put it on the calendar, and then they'll have 6 months to lead into it. And then they do a certain regimen every week to get ready for that final event. And one of the things I do in recommending to people is do the steps in order, because it's so easy to get overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, I've got to have food, I've got to have water, I need batteries. What do I do about my pets? What do I do about my elderly parents that live across town? And you get paralysis by analysis many times. And what I tell people is get my manual, get someone else's manual, doesn't matter what you do, but come up with a schedule, come up with a checklist, and do those things in order. That way you don't get overwhelmed, and you're making sure that you accomplish those key tasks that you need to get done in order to get better prepared.
Yeah, I think of something else that I've picked up from you over the years is there's ways to we're talking more sort of disaster related and in our home, but there are little things that can be done. And I'll give you an example, just in thinking a little differently, in being prepared. And something that might seem a little silly, but I picked up from Paul, is whenever I check into a hotel room now, I look for the nearest exit from my room and I walk those steps, right? So, okay, I'm going to exit my door and I'm going to walk 32 steps to the right. Thinking if there's a fire, something happens, I'm not going to be able to see. That's where the exit is. And so little thing takes me, 60 seconds when I check into a hotel. But are there some other little practical things that are outside of sort of disaster preparedness at home that you might throw out there?
One of the things I like to recommend to people is creating what I call the evening layout, so that if you have to get up in the middle of the night for some reason in a hurry to fix something outside or to take care of something, that your clothes, your shoes, your flashlight, all of it is laid out so you can get it on quickly. That's one of the things. It's just creating that mindset that preparedness is more about a lifestyle rather than just, okay, I bought my food and water, check, and now it's done. It's about being conscientious of everything around you and thinking, always asking yourself, what if? If I had to get up tonight in the middle of the night at 3:30 in the morning to tend to something outside, what could I do right now that's really easy to do, doesn't take a lot of time, that would make my life much easier? And I learned that years ago. I was a volunteer firefighter when I first moved to Texas, and that's one of the things I did, was that you might get called out at the middle of the night. Getting your gear together, collected, so that you can get it on quickly and get out the door and start helping people. Those are the things that you can do. Is just start asking yourself, what could happen when I drive to work, and what could I do to manage that risk? And you may say, I could have a fire extinguisher in my car, or I could have a first aid kit in my car. And when you talk about your vehicles, I tell people, do preventative maintenance. Make sure you've got good tires and good brakes. And so many people, when they hear that, they say, gee whiz, I thought preparedness was about buying water filters and guns and ammo and night vision.
And a bunker.
Right. Getting my truck lifted so I can have big tires on it. I thought that's what prepping was all about. And there's some of that, right? But the message I tell people is, if you are bored of your preparedness efforts, it probably means you're doing it right. Because a lot of this isn't exciting, but when something bad happens and your stress level is much lower than everyone else's, because you have ways to light your house in case the power goes out. You have ways to prepare food. Your kids aren't going to go hungry. You have extra medications on hand in case the pharmacy, or you can't get to the pharmacy, or they're closed, or supply chain issues have clogged up and now they're not getting supplied.
That would never happen.
That would never happen. Never happens. There's everything now. Since the pandemic, we are getting a class, it seems almost weekly, on what could possibly go wrong. And if I had told you at the end of 2019, Commissioner, we're going to have a pandemic, we're going to have rapid inflation, we're going to have a threat of World War III, we're going to have all these things, you'd have said,
supply chain will come out of my mouth multiple times a day.
you would probably be recommending I go see a therapist and get help, and yet here we are, right? We're looking at the possibility of a huge drought, not just in Texas, but in Oklahoma and other parts of the country. We're looking at phenomenal impacts on our agricultural sector. And what does that mean for our food supply? We've had our president tell us we should expect food shortages here in the United States. I mean, we are living in times that, until the pandemic, we would have said, that's something you would see in a movie, right? That doesn't happen in the United States. Well, it's happening now, and I think more people are at least waking up to the idea that maybe they need to be a little more self-sufficient to help ride out some of those troughs of uncertainty in the months and weeks ahead.
Yeah, that's great. Really poignant point. So a couple other things, Paul. You train and provide something called the Rapid Preparedness System, that focusing on three things. Do you want to talk about that
Sure.
for a second?
And so in the manual I've created, I have focused on getting as prepared as you can, as quickly as you can, and as inexpensively as you can, because those seem to be the barriers. How long is it going to take me to get prepared, and how much is it going to cost? The cost thing is a big variable, because I don't know your situation. If it's cheaper for 2 people to prepare than it is for 8, right? So we look for ways to reduce those costs, and that is why I have really focused my efforts on encouraging people, when you are buying things to stock up on the food, the water, the medications, get that at your local grocery store. Most of the shelf-stable stuff that you see at your grocery store, that will work just fine for your needs. It's stuff you're already eating right now. And I think that's the real driver here is the easier we can make this and the less expensive we can make the process of preparedness, the more likely people are actually to engage in it.
Good. That's helpful. And then you, in your action plan, you talk about seven categories?
7 categories.
Yeah. So can you talk about those?
Sure. So in the manual, we go through and I tell people to do one thing at a time. And I say, we're going to start with food. And you're going to pick how long of a period you want to be prepared for. 2 months, 2 weeks, half a year, whatever. You set that parameter. Once you've done that, we're going to get the food that you need, and we're only going to focus on food. So we start with food first. And once we're done with food, then we're going to move to the next step, and that's water. How much water do you need for that period of time? How are you going to purify that water? How are you going to collect more water when that runs out? We talk about that. The third thing is cash. And when I say cash, I mean not cash in the bank, but actually cash in your hand, cash somewhere in your house, because what if the power goes out and your ATM isn't working? What if the local grocery stores no longer can take debit or credit cards because of some crash to the system that processes those? You need cash, physical cash in your home that you can access outside of a bank so that you can pay those basic bills. And then we move on to hygiene and sanitation, which I think are probably the most overlooked items. What hurts people in disasters generally isn't the disaster. You talked about the folks who experienced a tornado. I suspect people were unfortunately injured running chainsaws, running power tools, working at weird hours in the night in the dark, trying to clean up the mess. We see lots of those type of injuries. We see lots of illnesses after a large-scale disaster because of sanitation issues. From there, we move to energy and lighting. How are you going to turn on the lights in your house? Do you have a backup system? Do you have lanterns, battery-powered lanterns? And then we look at communication. What is your plan to communicate with your family locally? What is the plan to communicate with your neighbors? And then security, last and foremost. Because what we see is in times of disaster, response times for police, fire, EMS go up dramatically. Fewer people coming to work because some of those people have been affected by the disaster directly. There's more things for them to go do if the city's not working, if traffic lights are out and everyone's calling 911 for help. Be ready to be your own first responder and have some plans to make your house more secure in times of disaster. So we go through those 7 things and we do those 7 things in order. And the idea is that once you conclude one topic and you move to the next, you're going to start feeling more prepared, and hopefully your stress level will go down as well.
Yeah, that was a memorable part in the book too. Was about being prepared to be your own first responder. And so along those lines, some basic things you can do is a CPR course with the Red Cross or a first aid course as sort of some starting points there. So Paul, as we kind of prepare to close out, we're in Oklahoma. We're with the Oklahoma Insurance Department. Any unique challenges or situations you think of from being a prepared status that might not apply elsewhere?
So every state thinks they're the best, right? In Oklahoma, though, in all seriousness, when I think of this state, I think of 3 critical roles it plays to the well-being of this country. Its role in the ag sector, its role in the energy sector, and its role in the transportation sector.
Insurance was just outside of
insurance,
that.
Insurance, it was a close fourth, Commissioner. But insurance makes all those things work. But I'll come back to that in a second. We need Oklahoma and Oklahomans to be able to function. All of us do as Americans. And so the more that Oklahoma is prepared, the stronger our nation is prepared because of the vital role the state plays. Now, talking about insurance, one of the things I stress to people is part of your preparedness plan needs to be insurance. You need to be visiting with your agent once a year for that insurance checkup, and no one wants to do that. Well, that's boring, and that's going to cost me money. I've never had a situation where going to my insurance agent once a year was a bad thing. Most of the time, every year, he found a way to save me money. And making sure I have the right coverages, making sure I'm not overpaying for coverages, because that financial piece is such a big deal. We had some tornadoes in Texas just a week ago, just outside of Austin. And we're finding that a number of those people had no homeowners insurance whatsoever. And now they're in line to get assistance from the state. They're in line to get assistance from charity and from FEMA. It would have been so much better if those folks had had a way to have insurance. And I don't know what prevented them from getting insurance, but those who have insurance are in such a better place to get their house rebuilt and to get rebuilt timely and to get it built back to code so that they are ready for the next storm.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot when I'm out speaking publicly, typically associated with flood, and how when we experienced the worst flooding in our history in 2019, how 90% of the damage was uninsured, and which is really flip-flop of what we typically see in a tornado situation or some other scenario. And I think folks believe that FEMA is going to ride in on their white horse and rescue them, and indeed FEMA does come in and they are helpful, but not near to the extent that being fully covered with insurance coverage would be. I mean, there's assistance there, but it doesn't take care of the damage that has happened there.
Some of the numbers I've seen from Hurricane Harvey, the delta between those who had flood coverage through FEMA, NFIP, and those who just got FEMA assistance is 90 to 100,000 if you had flood, and maybe as low as 1,500 if you didn't have flood insurance.
Yeah.
It's a huge delta. So the extent that people can have insurance, including flood insurance, it will improve your life dramatically at the time of the storm.
So, Paul, we're moving into our storm season, which is really how we kind of launched, or why we've launched Mulready Says Get Ready, before, during, and after a storm. So in your household, and when you're coming into storm season and you're getting a forecast of a storm, what other extra things that you do that maybe aren't happening when there isn't a storm warning in play?
Right. So in our family, we have what I call the preparedness binder, and it has a series of tabs so that, talking about your story earlier, if I'm not at home, any member of my family can get the preparedness binder, flip to the chapter that we're doing in the next 5-6 hours, and read the checklist of things we need to do before, during, and after.
So those tabs are by what type of category?
They're by what we would call in the insurance business perils, right?
Okay.
Severe storm, wildfire, power outage,
Got it.
Those sorts of things, hurricane, tropical storm, so that we know. And if I sense that we're going to have a period where a tropical storm, something we know has got I've got a long lead time on. I have what I call my A checks, B checks, C checks, and I'll start working through those. Now, I don't expect most people to do that, because I'm a little different. I'm a little more uptight when it comes to this sort of thing. But I think a family in Oklahoma they're under a severe thunderstorm watch or a tornado watch, that should trigger a few things, right? First of all, they need to know, where are we? Where is the family in the next 6 hours or through the duration of the warning or the watch? Are we at ball games? Are we at church? Are we at school, or is it the weekend? Is a kid over at someone else's house? We need to have an accountability system where we know where everyone's going to be, and have a way to get in touch with them if things get bad. If they're going to an activity, a youth activity, is there some adult there who's going to be paying attention to the weather? Mm-hmm. You may have to become that adult. That's the sort of thing, because not everyone's going to be thinking in these terms all the time. So that's the first thing, is to figure out where everyone is. And then if things get bad, if the winds get up and we need to take shelter, what do you want the family to do? Where do you want them to go? Rehearse that. When my kid was, her 7 or 8, we started doing disaster drills at our house, and she wasn't really keen on it. So I created this system called disaster dollars. And for every drill she did successfully, she got cash. And that was something of a motivator. And then the American Girl catalog came to the house. And she and her friend had been sitting at looking at one day, and she came home, and with the fire drill that I wanted her to do was, we have one of those rope fire ladders that you can buy at some of the Home Depot or whatever. And her bedroom was on the 2nd floor. And I wanted her to be able to deploy that ladder, get out the window, get on the ground by herself with no adult supervision. And she came home and to complete the drill, she got $10 every time she did the drill. She says, we're doing that drill today for 5 times because I need $50. So we got her to the point where she could get from her bed, out the window, get the ladder deployed, get on the ground in under 90 seconds. So I paid her $50. Now, she thought she was ripping me off, but who wouldn't pay $50 to know that in an emergency, my kid has the skill and the know-how and the resources to get out the window and on the ground in 90 seconds. And she was like 8 years old at the time. So do those drills. And then start playing what if. What if mom and dad aren't home when tornado comes or when weather comes? At what point do kids feel like they should get into the shelter without being prompted to do so? What happens if mom and dad aren't home and the power goes out? What should the kids do? Is there a survival box, a preparedness box of flashlights and supplies and glow sticks or whatever it is you want to put in there so that kids can navigate around the house if they're by themselves. Start thinking in those terms. And again, beginning of storm season, have that conversation with your insurance agent. One of the things I recommend people do is to say, okay, let's say a tornado takes off my roof. Show me the math of what I get if they tell me it costs $50,000 to replace my roof. How much am I going to pay out of pocket? How much is my insurance company going to pay? Because a lot of people think they understand how their deductible works, and then they have a claim, and maybe they don't have replacement costs. Maybe they have an ACV policy on their roof. How does that going to work? I need to know. And you may find that, gee whiz, with supply chain issues, with labor shortages, with demand surge, you may find that you don't have enough insurance on your home. You may need to increase it depending on your policy to make sure you have
if
coverage.
I can interrupt, Paul,
please.
inject right now, just from the insurance department standpoint, something that I find as I'm out interacting and speaking publicly is I think a lot of folks aren't aware that most every homeowner's policy now has moved to a percentage for wind and hail deductible, separate from, wasn't all that long ago, you had a $500 deductible on your homeowners,
right.
You had a $1,000 deductible, and that was across the board. But at least here in Oklahoma, most all homeowners have moved to a 1%, a 2% deductible, and that can be a substantial amount that, as you just described, the roof blows off, that's going to be a substantial deductible versus the old days. So,
and a lot of people, when they get that percentage deductible, think that percentage is a percentage of the claim and not a percentage of what their home is insured for. Mm-hmm. And that's a very sobering conversation to have post-disaster. So one of the things I recommend is sit down with your agent and have an exercise. Go through what it would look like if what ifs. What if my outbuilding, if my shed out back gets clobbered? Do you pay for that? If so, how much? And does a deductible apply? Does it matter how it's destroyed? If it's destroyed by fire, does that affect how much it pays versus wind or hail? Those are the sorts of questions you need to ask so that you understand and you can see if there's any shortages, any shortcomings in your plans, your financial plans, so that you can make changes to that as well. So once we've done those things, we've figured out where everyone is during the tornado watch or severe thunderstorm watch. We've drilled this a few times. We've got insurance. At this point, we just need to be vigilant and pay attention, right? And don't do things like, gee whiz, I know there's a thunderstorm over there, but maybe it's okay if I go to the grocery store, right? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but you've got to have a heightened sense of awareness of what's going on around you so that you're not caught inadvertently out in severe weather.
Yeah. So in talking about that, too, I just think about trying to make our homes more resilient and sort of mitigating some of the risks. Some of that is building materials, some of that is action you can take as far as things around your home. But talk about some of the things that folks can do, maybe what some things you've done at your home from a resiliency and a mitigation standpoint.
Right. So if anyone is building a home from scratch, I highly recommend that they go to the Institute for Insurance, Business, and Home Safety, IBHS. You go to that website and you download what's called the Fortify Program Guidelines. And that is how to build your house to make it more resistant to wind, hail. There are programs to make it more resistant to hurricanes, wildfires now. They're doing work on that area as well. We built our home a few years ago, and we actually built it to high wind and hail standards. Doesn't really cost that much more to do that, but you get a lot more protection. If you're not building your house, some of the things you want to look at is, we'll start with just the basics. Is your alarm system monitored? Do you have an alarm system, and is it monitored? A lot of people have alarm systems, I find, but then they don't pay for monitoring. What kind of doors do you have, and are the door locks sufficient? Look at if you're concerned about flying debris in a storm. They make this film that you can put on your windows that you can't notice the film, but it greatly increases the security of that window from being smashed by debris or someone tries to break in. Generators. Should you have a generator? I get this question a lot. It's a good question, and it really is dependent on a number of things, because for the generator to run, you have to have fuel. And do you really want to store lots and lots of gasoline to run that generator? Maybe you're in a place where you can do that. And if you're going to run the generator, do you have a sense for what you're going to run with it? Because you see these ads where the small generator runs all the electronics and all the lights in the house. That's not realistic, as you know. Have a plan to run the freezers and the refrigerators and charge up your devices, those sorts of things. And then beyond that, it's not really, there's no rocket science to this. You could go to ready.gov. That's the FEMA's website. They've got a lot of great ideas of things you can do in terms of having a first aid kit and having flashlights. My kid complained last year, and she's a young adult, and she complained that I asked her for a flashlight. We were over his place. She says, I don't have one. And it's one of those things as a prepper dad, you just feel like you
Wrong
just
answer
failed.
for this dad.
Well, you feel like you failed as a prepper dad. Like, how do you not have a flashlight? And so I went on Amazon, and her Christmas stocking had like 15 LED flashlights. I just shoved them all in there. And I'm like, you will never say that to me again. You have no excuse now. And making sure you do those things, those little basic things. Have flashlights in your vehicle. Have a fire extinguisher in your vehicle. Teach your kids how to change a tire. That was a battle we had at my house because I wanted to teach the teenager when she got her first car on how to change the tire. And she's like, I can just go on YouTube and watch a video, or I can just call AAA. I'm like, well, that's true, but it would be nice for you to know some life skills and how to do some things. So, and on my blog,
How much did that lesson cost you?
I never could. I mean, I could have put a pretty significant dollar figure, and I don't know that I could have gotten her to the point where I was probably not willing to pay what it would have taken to get her to learn how to do that.
Good. Well, you've mentioned a couple sites, and I just want to repeat those for folks. But IBHS is one, which is a great resource. I know that they'll walk through the resiliency and construction, and even, I'll tell you, they'll coach you through having bushes and trees close to your house and how much of a difference that makes, the proximity to your home. But then also FEMA's site, which is ready.gov, which has a lot of good material. And then also our site has some things too, so oid.ok.gov. So there's 3 sites that folks could visit to learn more, pick up on this issue. So. Good. Well, as we close out, Paul, we've talked about your book. You've mentioned the blog. Let's take a second to just make a plug for that. Or where can folks find more information that you've talked about?
Sure. My website is paultmartin.com. paultmartin.com. There's a link you can go buy the book. With the exception of the book that you buy on Amazon, all the information on the website is free. You can download that 50-page manual for free. There's a food planning spreadsheet you can also download for free, and then you can alter it and change it and take things out and raise prices, lower prices. That's just a tool to get people started. And I blog fairly consistently, once or twice a week, trying to get that information out. Seems like there's a lot more people interested in this. So if they visit paultmartin.com, they can spend hours and hours reading things I've come up with and things to think about.
Good. Well, Paul, thank you for those resources for folks out there, and really have enjoyed having you here with us. This has been just great, and we'll close out with that. Thanks for joining us on another Mulready Minutes podcast. Well, welcome back to the second edition of our conversation with Paul Martin on disaster preparedness. Paul's an attorney and an author and insurance guy and overall good guy, but we're going to continue this conversation in episode 2. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Mulready Minutes. That wraps up our conversation with Paul Martin. You have some great resources to go to with those websites, ready.gov, the IBHS website, and of course always oid.ok.gov. Thanks for joining us.